Hi, welcome to An Evil Mind. Today we're going to talk about what I call the extended Bolan-verse. And that would be Mack Bolan, the executioner, the protagonist of starting in 1969. I think by the time they ceased publication a few years ago, they were up to like 450 odd books in the series, maybe a little more than that. But there were spin-off titles after a certain point in the 1980s, and those were combat teams. They weren't like single protagonist books. There was Able Team, there was Phoenix Force, and there were the SOBs, the Soldiers of Barabbas. Niles Barabbas, their commander. They were a mercenary outfit that took missions from a U.S. senator and his former, CIA assistant, for lack of a word. We'll get into that in a few minutes. First, though, before we get into these, we have to talk about how all of this happened. And even though I already did a Don Pendleton, who was the Mack Bolan original author, even though I did a thing about him some time ago, let's recap real fast. So, yes, the Mack Bolan executioner, he's one of countless what I call action noun heroes. You know, there's the executioner, there's the penetrator, there's the sharpshooter, the enforcer, the extirpator, all of these kind of things. But the executioner was originally meant in '69 to be a one-off character. It was only going to be one book, and it was originally titled Duty Killer, and it later was retitled War Against the Mafia when the editors who purchased the book prevailed upon Pendleton to turn it into a series. Now, this series was originally published by Pinnacle Books. However, Pinnacle did not exist prior to the creation of the Bolan series. Originally, the house was Beeline Books. And I think they mostly did smut novels. At least that's what the internet suggests, which meant they would not have been strangers to Pendleton, because Pendleton, before he started writing action novels, wrote science fiction, but he also wrote a lot of smut books. He wrote erotic fiction, and so he goes to Beeline, sells them the Executioner, retitle it. It's going to be a series. Fine. However, there was some legal contention after a certain point about who owned the characters and who didn't, and this is after the first 15 books. So number 16 in the series, Sicilian Slaughter, was not written by Pendleton, was written by someone credited as Jim Peterson. Everything got worked out. With number 17, Pendleton comes back, writes until number 38 when his contract is up. Number 38, it finishes off what would come to be known as the Mafia Wars segment of the character's existence. After this, Pendleton takes this character and all of his associated characters. Everybody else who ever appeared in the books gets to be fair game. This will be important momentarily. And goes to Worldwide Library, which is to say Harlequin Books. Yeah, Harlequin, the romance publisher. But they start up an imprint called Gold Eagle just to do action books. And they end up, doing many, many series besides the ones that we're going to talk about, and besides the Bolan books. It was a big thing, and they did actually like a lot. Of course, it was the '80s, so they did a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction too. So there was the Survivalist series, there was the Deathland series. That were usually like post-disaster, usually a nuclear war. Which is something that all of the other Gold Eagle heroes, often averted by the skin of their teeth. So number 39, that book kicks off a whole new Bolan series, which ran with Gold Eagle, like I said, until I believe about 3 years ago, when they finally just stopped publishing new ones. And by this point, Bolan's age had become, like so many series characters, this is hardly unique to this character. A lot of series characters, at some point you've got to go in and modify them. Hell, that had happened early. Everybody knows Mack Bolan was a Vietnam veteran. And again, I'm going into this because it figures into something in a few minutes. Special Forces. He was a sniper, specifically, in Vietnam. Well, actually, very early in his history, Bolan had also been a Korean War veteran. Well, this becomes, untenable as we move further into the 1970s. he starts to get a little older. It's one thing for Spencer, to be a Korean War veteran. But Bolan, who is much more physical even than Spencer, has to be de-aged some. So, what the setup for the Gold Eagle books is, after Bolan has wrecked the mafia, it's estimated, by the end of the first 38 books, he's killed at least 2,000 mob guys. By the end of that, he gets a new mission. They recruited by the government to fight international terrorism, and they go ahead, they fake his death at the end of his final mission in New York, where he's fighting the mafia. They fake his death, plastic surgery, new name. He's now Colonel John Phoenix, goes to work for an outfit called Stony Man, because it's based in the Stony Man Mountains in Virginia. There's a whole 160-acre compound there. Was a full support network for covert anti-terrorist activities. And Bolan is just one component in that. So he also recruits 2 other teams to work with him, which is Able Team, which is 2 guys that he served in Vietnam with, who were the only 2 survivors of a squad of former Vietnam veterans that was put together in Bolan's second book, The Death Squad. And everybody else except for these 2 guys in Bolan were killed over the course of that book. We'll get into that. And the other one is a former Los Angeles police detective who appears early in the Bolan series and then pops up at some point within the series going to work for the federal government as well. The guy in charge of this whole project is Hal Brognola, who is the former Justice Department official who was officially tasked. God, that's redundant. It was tasked with heading up the government's Get Bolan squad, via the Justice Department over the course of the Mafia Wars. And also a former Mafia pilot who had a change of heart and was recruited by Bolan, Jack Grimaldi, comes on board. A former undercover officer named Leo Turin, who posed as a mob, a pimp. He ran the prostitution stuff in Bolan's hometown. I won't get into this. I figures into Bolan's whole his backstory and his original motivation, which is the death of his family due to the mafia, which is why he goes on his campaign. Turin is part of this whole deal as well, although he sort of gets phased out over time. And also, he's another Vietnam veteran. He's actually a former Green Beret. Okay, so as part of his ongoing effort, Bolan, so he creates the Able Team. He also creates Phoenix Force, who originally, none of those guys are Americans. It's kind of like a foreign legion sort of setup. There's an Israeli guy, there's a Canadian guy, British guy, Japanese guy, Cuban guy. A couple of them are naturalized citizens, but none of them are native-born citizens of the U.S. Why that's important, I don't know. That's just how they set it up initially. That does change over time. See if I got anything else here. I think I've covered all of this right now. So we're going to talk about Able Team.
Like, subscribe, repost, share everywhere. To see what else we're up to, visit xynobooks.com, xenobooks.com.